Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you. I am Julie. I'm so happy to see you all here. I am the Executive Director of the National Press Club Journalism Institute, and I am honored to be here with Keith Woods and Tom Huang. Keith is Chief Diversity Officer at NPR. Before that, he was Dean of Faculty at the Poynter Institute, longtime writer, editor, teacher, and coach on all manner of things. And Tom is the Assistant Managing Editor for Journalism Initiatives at the Dallas Morning News, a Poynter adjunct faculty member, coach in the local news innovation program, an editor with American Press Institute, and more. And I've been very, very fortunate to know them both. And when I think of them as writers, one of the lessons that their writing teaches me over and over is how to grieve in very personal ways, and yet in public, which seems especially important in this moment. So we're going to start this conversation between Keith and Tom. We also want to hear your questions, so please start sharing them in the Q&A queue, and in about 15 minutes we'll start posing them to Keith and Tom. But first, thank you again to Keith and Tom for being here, and let's start this conversation with a question. So talk about what grieving is for you and what role writing plays in it.
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so grieving and writing for me are intertwined because I'm the kind of person who needs to write things down to discover things about myself and my emotions and how I'm relating to the people that I love. I don't always verbalize that as much as I should. So writing helps me think about important moments, think about the details that I witness, think about the important people in my life, and then just by the act of writing, I'm discovering something. My father was diagnosed with cancer 7 years ago, so I've been walking with him on that journey, for, going back and forth between Dallas and Illinois. Obviously that stopped now because of the coronavirus crisis. Then my mom developed some serious health problems and passed away this past January. And so what I found has helped me as a writer is to actually write short pieces and share them on Facebook with my friends, step away from those dispatches, and then take some of that material and write essays that have been published over the last 7 years. So again, it's really helped me process, the writing has helped me process the grief along the way. And I see a lot of that in Keith's writing too.
Well, you know, the one most interesting thing about this is that when, Julie, when you asked me to do this, I thought, well, when have I written about grief? And I had to go back and read through the things that I'd written to find that's what, in fact, what I was doing. You mentioned the piece that I did on the shoeshine man I grew up with in New Orleans, we called Shorty, and a 5-year anniversary piece on the Katrina, the anniversary of Katrina. And I went back and looked at that and said, oh yeah, of course, obviously you're grieving. But in different from Tom, who I think has this remarkable ability to turn it around tomorrow, you know, and take a feeling out and put it there tomorrow. I work differently for my own writing, and most of it is spoken. I tell the story a lot before I write the story. That's generally how I do essays overall. And then the actual writing of it, I find that I have to sit down and revisit the emotions. I don't have, I'm pretty clear on how I'm feeling when I'm feeling it. I'm not having to discover that part. And I think a lot of ways, my challenge is to sort it all out and find words for it. But in a writing, in each of these stories, I had to sit down and just be with the idea of the moment of the story for a little while. And I start feeling the feelings, and then I can write. I can't do it any other way. And my personal writing, I don't know necessarily that I begin with the end of the story in mind, but I do. I can't start writing until I feel for certain that the thing that I'm about to write is representative of something true in me, and not just hey, I'm feeling bad, let me write about it. And so that's process-wise, it's a little bit of that.
I think what's interesting and challenging about all of this is that everyone's writing process is different. I mean, you can see that Keith and I often write about similar themes, but our approach to the writing is different. And then the grieving process is different for everybody. You know, what I've learned is that every individual has really different ways of grieving, and the grieving comes at different times.
Yeah.
And
You know what I hear though, Tom, in your writing um, is a kind of calm reflection, where I don't feel gushing emotion, anger, sorrow, whatever the feelings are. I don't feel them come out that way in the writing. But it's almost like I mean, this is you as a human being too, so it's not just you as a writer, but the kind of deliberative way of thinking about how this feels, it pulls out of me all of the more powerful emotions that you only open up the pathway for, but don't always necessarily visit yourself. And I just think that's a powerful, it's powerful evidence of what the personal essay can do, to have my story integrating with yours, and then my reaction to it being very different, because we are different in that way.
I think what I struggle with as a writer is to understand how much to share and how much to have in the piece, because I can talk personally about being with my mom for 12 days in the hospital, and every single day was a body blow. And a lot of my grieving actually happened at that time, and I'm actually looking back on it grateful for that time. I grieve at random times now, but it's not as intense. But sometimes I don't know how to write that down and describe it.
But I'm going to just cite a piece that you are about to publish, on your mom's death, and there are details in it, and I think that this is pretty much what I am always aspiring to as a writer, that are simple, ordinary details. They aren't things that say, when you see this, when the clouds part and now everybody has this epiphany. It's, pushing your father's wheelchair to the bed so that he can touch your mom's forehead. It's you tapping your fingers on her forehead because that has some very specific personal meaning to you. The fact that you fed her applesauce and vanilla ice cream, details and specificity, none of which unto themselves would move anybody in any particular way. But each time you offer a detail, I find one from my experience that is a corollary to that. And so I don't need to feel your emotion in reading your piece. I've got enough of my own, and enough things to visit once I get there. That's why I think in a personal writing, people, I think a lot of times think, well, why would anybody be interested in the fact that I fed my mom applesauce and vanilla ice cream? And I think you really have to release that. You noticed it. It has a significance in that moment to you. Trust me to, as a reader, integrate it into my own story and feel it in my own way.
I was thinking of your writing and what Chip Scanlon, I think, once said about the more specific details you use, the more universal the piece can be.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you spew out 12 different details, but you decide the one or two that are really important to you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the personal, the more personal, the more universal, I think, and it was a paradox that you really had to unpack. But it isn't because, it isn't that my personal information is necessarily universal to your experience. Um, it's that the act of life in the ordinary, in the granular, is the universal experience. And when I read somebody else's details, I am both learning something very specific about them, but it's also opening a door for me to explore my own experiences. So, you know, my experience in losing my dad was very different from your experience in losing your mom. My experience in losing my mom was very different than yours. Um, but what was universal is that I bet if you really thought about it, you'd find a couple of absolutely ridiculous details that you remember. Um, and that's universal. You know, you're going to find these moments, and I think about when my mom, she was right before she died. My family gathered in a hospital room. I came out from visiting a doctor, having just been stricken by the news that this was going to now take this horrible turn. My dad noticed, came up to me, hugged me. Everybody else noticed that my dad was hugging me and that this was a meaningful moment. And they came in and they created this massive family hug. And I'm old enough to remember when the Mary Tyler Moore show ended. On that last episode, the whole team at this television station gathered in this great big group hug and then needed Kleenex. And so they started moving as a pack toward the Kleenex. And when this thing happened in the hospital, the weight of that gathering of family started moving us. And I am sitting there with these incredibly contradictory feelings of grief I have never known and the urge to laugh. And it was just, you know, how do you tell somebody that that happened? But once you do, your experience in the ridiculous now has a pathway, and you might not remember the Mary Tyler Moore show or how it ended, but you might remember some contradictory feeling that you had, and that's the universal part.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Keith, is that these are really difficult and ugly things, and to try to write honestly about it is really difficult, and just to face it. And you know, what I was telling Julie was that this is not just, I mean, we're not just doing this for catharsis. We want to share some of these stories because I want to encourage people to face mortality and death and to be there, you know, with their aging parents and be on that journey with them. And I sometimes worry that in our society right now, it's something that we want to hide away and not really talk about or address. You know, Keith, you shared your essay about the passing of your dad after Katrina, and you bring us, if I remember right, both into the nursing home and then into the hospital. And it's just really difficult. I know it was very difficult for you to experience that and then write about it.
Yeah, and again, to find the things that are most important to tell. I mean, I don't always know why I need to write something. And I told Julie the other day that you know, sometimes I need to answer the question for myself. You know, why is this worthy? Why is this story worthy of being told? And even though I am constantly telling writers, it is, you are worthy, you are worthy. I have the same sort of writerly fear. Said maybe nobody really cares about this story. I think with my parents, the writing that I've done and the essay that I shared with you, Tom, is actually part of I don't know, a memoir that one day will be a memoir. But as I visited those things and wrote those things, it is all in the assumption that at the end of this, first of all, I will find meaning in having written it. The one thing that I have learned to do as a writer over the last 15 or 20 years is to trust that if I can just tell the story and tell it honestly, that maybe I'll have the effect that you want, which is that somebody will turn to their parents and take their hand through that horrible journey. But maybe it'll have a different effect. I can't really predict which of those it might be. But my hope always, and I say this every time I talk to somebody who's lost a parent, my hope always is to help people to find the value in the memory and hold on to that, even as they are trying to heal from the loss. And that's all really that I'm trying to do in writing. And I believe in the writing that you've done, Tom. I mean, the ways that you've found to express the sort of existential pieces of this, that you said this world survives us all. Now that you are on the other side of this experience with your mom, you're seeing the world that way. But that's just you giving me the benefit of how you see the world. And it's completely up to me as the person who's consuming it to figure out whether that's the thing, that's the one that has the greatest value to me, or whether it's this larger notion that we all need to be open about that journey.
Let me bring a question in, because you're talking about sort of both the rawness of the grief and the alchemy that happens as you write about it and as you share it. And so many people are right now sharing personal accounts of different kinds of loss, either tied specifically to this pandemic or just timed to be happening, concurrent. And so we have a question from one of the participants who asked, do you feel that people shy away from the work because of the discomfort with dealing with talking about grief? And I wonder, especially now, as there seems to be sort of this, perpetual stream of loss, how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I know personally, and maybe Keith as well, that it's really hard to write about these things now, certainly because we all have jobs that we're working on that are chaotic and incredibly overwhelming right now, but also because maybe we need to process what's going on for a bit before we can even try to write about it. But I think, Julie, your impulse to have a webinar like this is the idea that maybe now, especially with all of us isolated, is an important time to be writing and sharing what we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think engaging where and how you can engage is a real, I don't know, that's the best that I can come up with. Julie asked me to be a part of this, and I said, well, I'm not sure I can be very helpful because I can't write right now. I feel blocked in a way that all of us in some way or the other are kind of blocked by whatever the collective chaos is that we're experiencing. But I know enough about writing to know that you're always writing at some level or the other, that you're ingesting and processing in some way. Tom, you have the ability to turn that into a Facebook post. I might be able to turn it into an email. That might be the best that I can manage, but it never goes away. And I think that I was just talking about a piece that I read from our mutual friend, Rick Holter, who lost his dad to COVID just last week. and reading the piece, experiencing this with him as he talks about that experience that we've written and stories about it over time. You know, having to watch on video the funeral of his dad, having to have two family members having to travel in different cars because they were having to live in different parts of their houses at the time. This ridiculousness of this moment. But I need to be able to read those things as a writer, even as I prepare for myself to find whatever the story is that I have in me about this moment in time. And I think that that's the way to view writing overall. You know, our colleague Roy Peter Clark always said that, you know, procrastination is writing. It's just pre-writing. So if you think of everything that way, maybe you're one of those folks who has to write a note here or there, or, you know, tell a story as I do to somebody else to preserve it until I can write it. Just do whatever part of that you can.
I mean, writing is definitely thinking. You know, thinking is the hardest part of it. You know, the reason why I write posts on Facebook is that it forces me to think and write, and because sometimes I get paralyzed in the thought process and I don't write it down.
Yeah.
But Facebook kind of prompts me to do it. Pam had a question about what do I and Keith, I think, wish we'd known the weeks before our parents passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I guess I could say I wish I'd known how hard, just immensely hard it was going to be, both emotionally and physically and spiritually and in all of those dimensions, and then just handling all of the logistics. But I don't know that would have actually prepared me. I don't think anything really can prepare you for the death of a parent.
Yeah, I think that's the truest words ever, that you lose one parent and it doesn't prepare you for the death of the second parent. You have somebody share reams of experience about losing their parents. It doesn't help you in the slightest. That the only way to prepare yourself for it is to live through it, and therefore you're never prepared. But I think the one lesson, it's a grief lesson as much as it is a writing lesson, is to recognize a week, you know, you say a week out or whatever, but recognize however far out it is, that there's, you know, that this is life process. This is not a moment process, and you're experiencing it. You know, I lost my dad 15 years ago. I lost my mom nearly 30 years ago. I don't go many days without having some feeling about that. And Tom asked for me to send some writing. I did. I read the piece that I had written. I don't know when I last touched that piece. And I cried again. The emotion is right there all the time. Writing doesn't relieve me of it, but it does give me a place to safely feel it. And this is such a powerful feeling, grief, that you know, I think we are reluctant to write about it, because you have to, in order to write about it, you have to get all the way to feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
And that scares the crap out of me every time.
So related to that, we have a question from Juliet Beverly, who asks, how did you manage emotionally to get through the editing rounds after getting through the first draft? So not just experiencing it once, but then working collaboratively with somebody to process how they think it could read.
I mean, for my own experience, it's just because I've been a reporter and editor for, you know, more than 30 years, I'm just used to that process. And I know that even if it's a personal piece, that I need other readers to help me edit and revise it. So it's just part of the work, and I don't, I've learned how to not take that too personally.
I take it all personally.
That's why I never edit you, Keith.
No, I think To me, I mean, I very much like Tom in that I think of stories as stories, and I live often my life that way. You know, our mutual friend Victor Marina told the story of writing in his notebook at his mom's bedside as she was going through her last days, and everybody in his family understanding that that's what Victor did, that that's how he lived, and so this is a story as somebody who lives their lives that way. The hardest part for me on this story always is getting to the moment when I can write it, and then it gets easier from there. I've never had an editor so callous that they didn't understand what they were dealing with when they were editing my piece. So I don't know the experience of worrying about that moment. And when I've worked with personal essays, and I do a course for Poynter on this every year, I tell the participants, we're going to get all juiced up about these stories because that's how I am as an editor. I don't want any of us to forget what we're handling in many of these stories, and how tender these feelings can be. But it's a story, and if you tell me that taking this out and adding this will make the story a better story, I can live with that.
Related to that, there's a question from Kitty about privacy and respect and how you decide where those boundaries are in terms of what you include and what you keep separate.
So I guess I made a decision early on, and it's a hard one, but that I would try to be as open about my family as I could. And, you know, certainly there are details that I might decide not to, that aren't as important to share. But I just had to make a decision that to write about this honestly, I would have to show really difficult moments and ugly moments. And, you know, so that's kind of you have to take a leap of faith as a writer that you're going to do the right thing. And that, I don't know, Keith, have you felt like you've had to hold back anything
Well,
for privacy?
I have 8 siblings, right?
Okay, yes.
Every story about my parents is a story about my 8 siblings. And, you know, the 40, I don't know where we're at right now, but 40 odd my parents' grandchildren. So my approach in personal writing always has been to first claim my story, right? You're intersected in my life in some kind of way, but it's always my story first. And how I see the world, how I experience the world is only me. I can't live it for anybody else or explain it for anybody else. But when I've published pieces about family, as often as possible, I've sent it to family ahead of time. My children, my ex-wife, different times over the life of my writing, I've shared it, and it's an accuracy check. Everybody understands the deal. If it's true and it hurts, then it's still true. And I don't, you know, I'm not reckless about that. I'm not cavalier about it. Any expression of somebody else's experience is profound, and you don't handle it lightly. But I begin as close in as possible in the experience, and privacy really has more to do with how broadly I open that lens to allow you to see other people. When it's closed tightly on me, it's not, privacy isn't so much an issue.
I would love so much to continue this conversation, and I also respect your time and the time of all the participants. And I will promise that we're going to share the rest of the questions with Keith and Tom, and And if there's an opportunity, we'll find a way to pass along any answers that we can. I want to thank you guys so much, Keith and Tom, for doing this. Just being in your presence and talking about this, I feel like really matters right now. So thank you. And I want to thank everybody who's with us, everybody who's participating, and everybody at the Institute behind the scenes, of course, who's helping with programs like this. We do have more programs coming up, so I want to share with you guys a little bit of information about that. You can see, hopefully, what we have coming up. We have a program next week on resilient newsrooms with Mike Wilson from the Dallas Morning News and Robin Tomlin from McClatchy and the News and Observer. We have a program with Connie Schultz and John Mooallem about resilience and community, and with Ibram Kendi and Robert Samuels and Shannon Young about how to be an anti-racist. So I hope to see you all at some of those programs. And of course, if you want to learn more about them or anything else that we're doing, you can find us at pressclubinstitute.org. And thank you guys again so much for doing this and for helping us write through some grief together.
My pleasure. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everyone who's here. We appreciate it.
Okay.
So how do we end these things? Bye-bye.